Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.
Gerrymandering is a method of voter suppression. We know that voters are less likely to turn out in gerrymandered districts than they are in competitive ones. That makes sense. Talking about behavioral science, if you think your vote, your single vote, can change an outcome, you will prioritize showing up to vote. You're more likely to sort of do the homework of figuring out who you want to vote for.
That's today's guest on Sidebar, Kate Barr, a trailblazing advocate for democracy.
Sidebar is brought to you by Monterey College of Law, San Luis Obispo College of Law, Kern County College of Law, and Empire College of Law, located in Santa Rosa.
Welcome to Sidebar, featuring conversations about optimism in action with lawyers and leaders inspiring change. And now your host, Mitch Winnick.
Today we have the great pleasure to revisit a topic with Kate Barr. Kate Barr is what I consider one of the most successful, unsuccessful political candidates in America. When we talked to Kate last time, we were talking about her Can't Win Victory Fund and how their group was going to encourage and fund individuals running in campaigns where gerrymandering and redistricting had made their candidacy highly unlikely for success. What I thought we'd do today is revisit the experiences of the last elections, including Kate's last election, and then I'd like to lean on something that's really unique and sometimes overlooked about Kate, which is her experiences as a behavioral scientist. I think we'd all be fascinated to hear more about what impact all of this is having on us as individuals, as voters, as citizens, as people informed about democracy, and where are we right now? Kate, welcome back to Sidebar, Optimism in Action.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you. Kate, give us a brief update on what have you been doing since we last talked to you? You've been very busy.
Yes. So I ran as a Republican in the Republican congressional primary for North Carolina District 14. I lost, but we had some fun in that race and learned some stuff. And then simultaneously, we recruited as a team, Can't Win Victory Fund, and then through our LLC, Slay Strategies, we recruited more than 60 state legislative candidates to run in North Carolina, and they are some of the coolest humans you will meet.
Kate, let's go just a little further in your own race. You ran and lost as a Republican, but if I recall, you were not previously a registered Republican, were you?
That's correct. I was running as a fake Republican because our congressional districts in North Carolina and now much of the country are so gerrymandered. The general elections are almost foregone conclusions. And that puts most of the competition into the primary for each of these seats. And so I wanted voters to actually have a choice in the Republican primary. Now, the trick is in North Carolina, Democrats can't vote in the Republican primary. So my race was entirely about how are we going to talk to unaffiliated voters and sort of middle of the road, more moderate Republicans.
As an introduction, tell us some of the things you think you learned from that experience.
So one of the coolest things, this district is held by a man named Tim Moore. He is an old-time GOP, like good old boys club kind of guy. He's a freshman congressman, but he was the Speaker of the North Carolina State House and actually drew this congressional district for himself. When we add the votes that I got on top of the votes in the Democratic primary for this district, we beat him, which means that more progressive and left-leaning voters turned out to vote in that primary than right-leaning voters. And that's pretty unexpected. That's not the kind of outcome we would anticipate seeing in a district like that. We also saw that more than 8,000 voters who are not registered Democrats showed up to vote for me. And we did a really interesting experiment around volunteer and voter engagement that we call the Pyramid Scheme for Democracy. And at least at present, it appears to be more effective than knocking doors at increasing voter turnout among unaffiliated voters. And that's incredibly promising going into this November.
So one of the things I'm concerned about, and I think this is the heart of what you're investigating as well, is that there's a level of discouragement of having really no voice, no vote. And as redistricting and gerrymandering continues to apparently expand in multiple states, I worry that we're going to get the opposite effect, that you brought new voices into the election who had an opportunity to state their opinion that'll be impactful. I'm worried that so many of these activities are going to discourage what would have otherwise been traditional voters. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we know that gerrymandering is a method of voter suppression. We know that voters are less likely to turn out in gerrymandered districts than they are in competitive ones. That makes sense. Talking about behavioral science, if you think your vote, your single vote, can change an outcome, you will prioritize showing up to vote. You're more likely to sort of do the homework of figuring out who you want to vote for. If you are like the more than 80% of Americans who are voting in a non-competitive state legislative or congressional election, you kind of have this expectation of how this is all going to turn out, regardless of whether you show up or not. And we don't exactly make voting as easy as we could in this country. And so people won't necessarily work to overcome the friction in our voting system to show up to vote if they think their vote doesn't matter. And what's worse is that they're kind of right.
Well, that's my concern. So let's talk about, you've learned a lot about with your Can't Win Victory Fund and your 60 some odd candidates. We have this point in time in America where some, myself included, are a little worried that democracy is on the ballot, actually by not being on the ballot in some cases. What would it take for us to turn this around? And I must point out that much of the research that's being done is it's somewhat irrelevant whether it's Democratic or Republican. The gerrymandering and the redistricting, regardless of party, is having the same impact on the individual voter. So what I'm really talking about are some of the systemic issues of what should we be thinking about doing next?
So there are sort of three different categories of things to do. There's what we should be doing in the immediate term. And that is essentially all of our political power is going to come from the South in the future. And we can dig into why that is separately. But given that that is true, there are about 100 state legislative seats in the South that are likely to be heavily gerrymandered going into 2028. Now, it's important to remember that for the most part in the South, state legislatures draw these voting districts. So if we work our behinds off in these 100 Southern state legislative districts right now and win as many of those seats as we can kind of shore up our system against potential future Republican gerrymanders that would come after November. Even cooler, these races collectively, the candidates running in these races are only about $4 million short from a fundraising perspective in comparison to their opponents. That in politics is like the cost of a mildly competitive congressional race. So it's a place where people can have a huge impact by supporting candidates through financial donations, volunteering, even from afar, doing things like writing postcards. That's something that we have to be on right this minute.
And I really like the point that, so you've brought up a point that even I, in the introduction, skipped by. We tend to get wrapped up in the federal elections, in the congressional and Senate races, and you get almost no conversation about what you just talked about, is that the work done in the local states on electing local state representatives are the individuals who are then involved in drawing the maps that will establish what the boundaries will be for the federal elections. And that starting to try to change it from the top down is not going to work.
That's right. It's our process, our focus needs to be state legislative elections and state Supreme Courts. We have seen how powerful those state Supreme Courts are. Not every state you get to elect your Supreme Court justices, but in many you do. Georgia, for example, right now you can go and vote in a state Supreme Court election and have an impact on what they will find about the maps we expect Georgia to draw. Then state legislatures, like I said, they draw the maps for Congress and for state House and state Senate. And it's a lot, frankly, cheaper to intervene in these places. This was the Republican strategy in 2010 when they launched Operation Red Map and took over state legislatures across the country in order to have the power to draw these district lines. I was talking to someone earlier, and I think Democrats were like still hopped up on hope from Obama and just missed the moment that that was happening and didn't fight back in the way that we wish we had now. But we have today, and we know where we need to fight and exactly what it takes to do it.
To that point, we may have talked about it before. I've been in California for 20 years, but prior to that, I was in Texas for 30 years. And what I watched was the Tea Party decide not to run in Texas for state level races, but to run for school district races. They ran the playbook you just described. They funded, sometimes for maybe a few $1,000s a race, sometimes a few $100s a race. They ran candidates for school district races that had never been competitive before. With those victories, they started building a bench of individuals more broadly known in their community. From school district, you'd go to Board of Supervisors. From Board of Supervisors, you'd go to the state legislature, state Senate, and eventually they now had, over a period of almost 20 years, a deep bench. And now you look at the results in Texas, and you can see absolutely how well it worked.
Yes, exactly. And now you're talking about our other two lanes, which are patience, where we have to decide that we are going to dig in and do work in places that we probably won't win in 2026, almost certainly won't win in 2026. But if we want to win in 2028 or in 2030, we have to be showing up in these places and spending our time and our energy and our capital supporting candidates who are really interesting to their community specifically. And that can be at the school board level, that can be mayors, county commissioners. I'm passionate about state legislators because that's the world that I'm most familiar with, but we are also actively recruiting for local races in Virginia right now for that very reason. Races where they haven't had the incumbent hasn't had a competitor in at least one cycle and maybe more. We at least want to start competing so that the voters there can see real elections, what democracy should look like, and we can hold those incumbents accountable and give the folks who think their vote doesn't count somewhere to put that energy, because you can flip a school board seat.
One of the things you're saying that also I don't think it's readily obvious, but it's very intriguing to me. You're taking the efforts your group is doing really outside of the traditional party mechanisms. You're soliciting candidates directly, if I understand correctly, and you're not trying to go back through the local Democratic Party or, in the other case, a Republican Party. You're getting out of that morass of party politics and going directly to finding candidates that you think should be new voices. Is that correct?
Yes. I should give full credit to especially the North Carolina Democratic Party, who was thrilled to have us do the work and identify candidates to run in these spots. And they were great partners of ours. But I am pro-democracy before I am pro-Democrat. And that means that sometimes I'm interested in running independent candidates' places or unaffiliated candidates' places. I quite frankly do not care what letter is next to someone's name, as long as they are advocating for policies that I think will make life better for the voters in my community, for the voters in our country.
So this question's a little out of the immediate realm of what you've been doing. But as you're talking about that, and we're talking about parties, we've obviously become boiled down to two parties in the United States. There are a few Green Party, a few independents at any level across the entire country. And yet we look to other countries, and I know they have a fundamentally different political system where they build coalitions to get leadership. But what is the possibility that we're at a moment where the terrible relationship that the two major parties are having and just warfare between them, that this could be a window to move away from just party politics and move more towards representative government at all different levels?
Dare to dream. I was on a call with Heather Cox Richardson a couple of months ago and basically asked her, are we watching a change in our political party, as we have done multiple times in history? And she said yes. Now, I don't know if she would say the same thing today, but she certainly knows more about it than I do. And it absolutely feels like there are a lot of people who are pretty frustrated with both parties. It's not like the Democratic Party has giant approval numbers right now, and the Republicans certainly don't either. And folks are searching for someone who represents them. And I don't think any of us are really finding it in the national leaders of either party. I certainly am not. I'm really interested in what we could build beyond this.
The interesting idea is that if you're looking back to starting building the new leadership at places like city councils and school districts and board of supervisors, those are not partisan elections in most cases. They are just community elections. And it really does open up that opportunity, I think, to rethink about how do we want to pick leaders, smart leaders, caring leaders, those who have an eye on the community. Even if we disagree with them personally, we agree that they've made an effort to represent the voices rather than just carry a party line that may or may not have been thought out on a local basis.
I think by the time you and I are ashes and dust, there will be a fairly different political system at work in America. I do not know what it will be. I have been thinking a lot about folks who were alive and fighting during the Civil Rights Movement, during World War II, during the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. And we are certainly not at violent war in our country, thank heavens. But we are at this moment where everyday folks are having to take action to make the country that they desire, that we don't trust our government to just handle it for us. And I have been thinking so much about how uncertain it probably felt to them, too. Reading backwards in history, it all seems like a foregone conclusion that these things would turn out the way that they have and that history kind of unfolds in a certain way, but we're sitting in the middle of it. And so it's an act of, frankly, faith in our American system, in our American community, to keep showing up and to keep fighting for the vision of this country that we most identify with, and hoping that whether it's us or whether it's our kids or our grandkids, that ultimately the other side of this is something that we would be proud of. For me, my core value in all of it is that the voters should be in charge. The structure and framework around it could look a whole bunch of different ways, and there are a lot of brilliant people who think about governmental systems. My core belief is just that government for the people should be close to the people.
Support for Optimism in Action comes from the Monterey College of Law, a nonprofit law school serving the Monterey Bay region with evening classes on campus or in a hybrid online format. More details and applications available at montereylaw.edu. That's montereylaw.edu.
One of the things I'm reminded of from time to time is that we forget our country's about to be 250 years old. And in the history of countries and governmental systems, that is infancy. 250 years is just the first go-round. Maybe we are reaching our first correction point that almost every other culture and political system in the world has gone through from time to time. You go back to the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians, and over several thousands of years, they've gone through some rough patches which had to correct the direction they were going. And maybe that's what we're doing. Maybe this is our correction point of a young democracy, a young country, having gone through a cycle and now need to be reminded that we have to step up if we want to have influence on what the next cycle would be.
For sure. There's a quote from a Polish citizen going around on the internet. To paraphrase, it's basically, congratulations, America, you are fighting fascism. We all have to do this at some time, and look how fast you're doing it. You are responding so quickly, and you are fighting back with such force. Way to go. I really liked that perspective because it can feel pretty dark and difficult. Frankly, like when we look at the gerrymandered maps and then we look at the population shifts and what might happen to the Electoral College and all of that stuff, it can feel a little gloom and doom. But yeah, we are doing it.
Two other things. One, I want to talk about what you think you're doing on behalf of your kids, because I know that's an active part of why you're doing what you're doing. I want to brag that I have my first grandchild. And
congratulations.
So thank you very much. And so it does change one's perspective of what are you doing now for them. What are your thoughts when you lay awake at night worrying about all this and your beautiful children are sleeping down the hall and you're thinking, what is this going to be for them?
So my beautiful children are currently sleeping on the floor of my bedroom. We got some death threats during the congressional campaign, so we moved them in, and I just haven't had the heart to move them out yet. It's so nice to hear them like breathe and make the cute kid sounds while they sleep. I just want them to be proud of me. I want, as a parent, to leave them a world that I'm proud of. And I have been reckoning with the fact that I don't really know if I'm going to get to do that. That's not in my control. All I can control is what I do each day to try to achieve that goal. But whether I reach it or not is going to be forces outside of me. I really just want them to see what it looks like for somebody to fight for what they believe in. And for them, I hope, to be proud of the role that they're playing in that. And because it's a whole family endeavor. Like, we don't put their faces on the internet, but they absolutely are participants in this, as is my husband. And I want our family to feel proud of the work that we're doing. It's also incredibly cool to listen to my daughter explain how voting maps are drawn. She's 10. And I think I learned how voting maps were drawn when I was like 32. And I took all the history and all the civics. It was not like I slept through civics or something, but I never really took in what that was. And she can tell you, oh, well, state legislatures draw the maps, but in some places there's an independent commission. It's just incredible. She's like talking about it with her friends at school. They know what's going on, not even because of me, but just because it's a conversation that people are starting to have in their homes more. And I think that's really cool. My husband calls it a responsibility to be a good ancestor. So we are trying to be good ancestors.
I love the sound of that. To your credit, and to give you hope that what you're going to do will absolutely work, I have said on this program before, my mother was active in the League of Women Voters. She started as a housewife volunteer back in the 60s, and she progressed up to be state president of the Texas League of Women Voters, and then progressed up to be on the National Executive Committee of the League of Women Voters. I don't actually remember a point in time in my home that the issues related to voting and registering people to vote and the value of voting wasn't just part of the fiber of our family.
Oh, I love that.
So I suspect you are building the same heritage for your children as well.
I certainly hope so. My mom similarly integrated the high school system in North Carolina as a teacher. The generation that came before us set the standard, and it's now our job to continue the work or to exceed the work. Good descendants, good ancestors. And hopefully our moms are proud of us.
I'm sure they are. My mom was very outspoken. She would gladly tell you her opinion of things. Nobody ever wondered about what her opinion was on something.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Let's talk last about some of the issues that you ran on in your campaign, because I think that's another part of what's going on. Many of the issues you talked about had the word fairness in it. And you were talking about economic fairness, job opportunity fairness, child care, groceries, public schools, the nuts and bolts of what makes a community thrive. Those seem to be the most important things. We talk about them as pocketbook issues, and supposedly that's what drives elections. I know they're all there. I know we're all talking about them. The ideas you posted on your campaign should resonate with every person who lives in your electoral area. And yet there's a disconnect. I'm not sure that I understand. What do you think about that?
I'm going to put my behavioral scientist hat on. I believe, and the data kind of points to this, that there are a number of people in our country who are essentially experiencing an identity crisis. And that happens when your core identity and your values are in conflict. Back in COVID times, we lost our geographic community. We couldn't spend time with our neighbors or with our friends that lived a couple miles away in the same way that we normally would. And a lot of folks then went and found community online. And because of the way the internet works and the way that we're fed content, a lot of folks found themselves in these really same-minded communities. Companies make money from selling ads. That means that they're trying to collect people with a similar perspective about something in the same place so that they have a higher probability of that group buying this thing that they're selling or clicking through so that they can collect ad revenue. And we found ourselves in silos, and that includes a MAGA silo. And a lot of folks really made these MAGA values and policies and principles a part of their core identity because that's what was necessary to be in community at that time. And being in community is critical to our survival as humans. That's like a long-term evolutionary thing. Well, MAGA might be part of your identity, but people have a lot of different elements. I talk about Inside Out a lot with this, if you've seen that movie. And you think about Riley, who's the young preteen. She has these so-called islands of personality. One's like Goofball Island, one's Family Island, one's Friendship Island, one's Hockey Island. These are the things that are core parts of who she is. So if you've got MAGA Island, you probably also have Family Island. You might also have a faith-based, like religious island. And what's happening right now is that for a number of folks, their identities are in conflict. These islands are in conflict because if you have a family island and you believe in the importance of family and you are watching children being ripped out of the hands of their parents by your government that you voted for, you've got a real problem, deep inside real problem. And it's really painful to lose a piece of your identity. It feels like trauma. And so people will shield themselves from it. They will look away. They will accept essentially any rational or even not so rational explanation for why these two components of themselves can continue to exist alongside one another. And I think that that's what we are seeing in a lot of cases. Like if you take the party label off of policies, Democratic or progressive policies are infinitely more popular than Republican or MAGA policies. It's that label where it suddenly triggers an identity response that really gets folks in trouble. And it makes people much more susceptible to misinformation because they are looking for an explanation that allows them to keep all the elements of their identity. It won't be this way forever. What we know is that people eventually sort through these kinds of things, but it is really painful for them to go through. In as much as we can find some empathy or at least space to understand that they might be going through something that feels kind of yucky, Admittedly, a lot of us have also gone through some things that feel kind of yucky as a result of their voting decisions. So it doesn't excuse them. It's just we need to let them go through this if we're going to get to the other side. And pointing and saying, I told you so isn't going to help.
Let's end on a note of optimism, which is easy for me to do with you because you've already hit that theme a dozen times in this conversation. What are the next steps for you? Getting up every morning and saying, what are the next steps?
Well, we are working on behalf of a bunch of these candidates running in deep red districts. We fundraise into a PAC called the Can't Win Victory Fund PAC, and then we use that money to pay for whatever those candidates need, whether it's actual team time to help them design yard signs and wall cards and websites and social media, or get them access to tools, or help them travel somewhere that they need to go. We are essentially trying to have the backs of candidates who are brave enough to raise their hands and run as Democrats in a deep red district. It brings me so much joy to work with them because when you are working with a candidate who's running in a place like that, they are not doing it to seek political power because that is not what you get by running in that district. They are doing it because they believe their communities deserve a choice, and they're doing it at personal risk, at social risk, it risks their jobs in some cases, and it feels really good to have their backs.
Kate, thank you for joining us again on Sidebar Optimism in Action. I had no doubt that we were going to get a review of the next chapter of the Can't Win Victory Fund and the fact that you and the 60-plus candidates you already had and all the additional new ones, that really is a breath of fresh air in a time of what's frequently gloom and doom on the political spectrum. You give us hope that at the ground level, there are people still stepping up and willing to look in the picture of big democracy, of getting representative government back on track. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us today.
Truly my pleasure, and thanks to the candidates who are running.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to Sidebar, Optimism in Action. For more episodes and information, go to sidebarmedia.org. That's sidebarmedia.org.
Sidebar would not be possible without our producer David Eakin, who composes and plays all of the music you hear on Sidebar. Thank you also to Dina Dowsett, who creates and coordinates Sidebar's social media marketing.
Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.